Are you ready, kids?
Aye, aye, Captain!
I can't hear you!
Aye, aye, Captain!
All right, pirates. This week we are going to finish up our North American artwork. So after you finish the lesson, you are going to turn it in by clicking that gray box to the right of the video, excuse me, the video, where it says submit. And you're going to take a picture and submit your assignment. You can also post it on our Padlet, and the link to that is under the red folder for class information. And I can't wait to see what your picture looks like. So I will see you on Friday at our live session, and have fun this week. All right, bye guys. All right, my friends, this week we are going to add color to our Indian corn. Now remember, when we looked at our flint corn, our Indian corn, they had tons and tons of colors, and they were really bright and really hard and shiny. Now you can choose whatever you want to color. With this, you can choose colored pencils, you can choose crayons. I've got some crayons here. You can also use watercolor. I'm going to demonstrate all three. So I'm going to start with colored pencil. And you can see that when we color it in, it creates a really nice firm border. Now I'm leaving a little crescent moon shape white so that it leaves it looking kind of shiny. And I'll show you a close-up in a second. But you can see how nice and bright the color is and how crisp the line is. See that little crescent shape there that gives it that bit of shine? Now once we get a couple of them colored, you'll start to really see it. So we draw on that crescent moon, and that's going to be our highlight. That's the white shiny part. I'm going to color right around it with my orange pencil. Set these aside. And I'm going to show you the same thing, but with a crayon. So there were tons of colors. I'm going to choose blue this time. I'm going to go down a little bit. And you can do the same thing. When you're coloring, just leave that little sliver of white to make it look shiny. You can see now that we have a couple of them colored, how they really start to look like they're hard and shiny when they're right next to each other. When you just have one, it's harder to see, but when you have a bunch of them together, it really works. Now, today we're going to use watercolor. So we want to have our water. My water is a little dirty. My paint is already soft. You want to put a drop of water in each of your paint. You want to have that nice puddle of water going on top so that your paint is flowing. You're not going to dig the paint out of the tray. All of my colors already, you can see they're slushy, kind of watery. That's why we call them watercolor. And if you want, you can use watercolor to color these. But when you're doing that, you want to make sure that we don't get two colors right next to each other. Now, at this point, we're going to use a crayon in the husk area. And we're going to draw in some texture. Texture is the way that something feels. So I'm just going to put in these little ridges to make our husk, that's sort of the peel of the corn, look rough, because they're usually dried out and kind of crunchy. So I'm going to put in a little bit of brown and a little bit of yellow. And this crayon is going to be our wax resist. Now, wax resist, if you recall, means that the wax sticks to the paper and it resists the paint. So the paint won't stick anywhere that there is crayon. So we're going to paint over this at the very end with brown, and you're going to see that yellow shine right through, and that dark brown will be there, and it's going to give our husks a little bit more dimension and more texture, which means it's going to look crunchier and like it's a little bit crispier. Now we're going to go ahead and get painting. The one thing I want to point out when you're painting is that you don't want to paint right next to each other, two kernels right next to each other. You want to sort of space them out. So what I typically do is pick one color, and then if I painted right next to it, you would see that the two colors are going to bleed together. So even without me touching it. And you're going to end up with one big blob, and in the end you're going to end up with a big brown kernel of corn because all of your colors are going to bleed together. So what I suggest you do instead is blot up any areas that sort of bleed together. Give it a second to dry and you can paint over it again. And then at this point, when we're going to paint, pick one color and spread them out. Paint those kernels. And we're not going to worry as much about the highlight when we're using the watercolor because it's really hard to control the paint. So we're just going to focus on keeping the paint within that space of the kernel. Now, if you choose to use crayon during this or colored pencil, that is fine. You do not have to use watercolor. I'm just showing you some options here. So you can see how I'm using that orange paint, dip it back in the orange, and I'm spreading out my orange kernels. So they're not touching each other, they're not touching another color. I'm getting lots of good coverage, going slow and using the tip of my brush, pulling the paint, not pushing it. Getting all of that orange. And as I finish up the orange, we will come back and see if we missed any spots. Can I get a little bit more paint? Our corn is already looking great. Now, I'm going to kind of let that dry a few minutes. You can always blow on it. When it's time to change colors, remember we swish our brush in the water, drag it on the side, and we're going to pick a different color. If you need, you can blow on it to dry those colors quicker. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next color. A little blot. Anywhere that you see your paint bleeding, you can always blot it with a Kleenex or with a paper towel. I'm going to go ahead and get started on my next color and paint the rest. So you can see how I'm spreading them out. Swish, cleaning that brush, spreading out my paint. Now as we finish with the kernels of corn, we're going to move on to the husk. And we will paint that brown right over our crayon and just let that dry. Now I have a couple of paint splatters on my paper, so I'm going to put another piece of paper below my paper so that I can paint right to the edge and not get any paint on my table and paint the background. Go really slowly around those points in the husk and then let it dry, turn it in. I'll see you on Friday.